Hello everybody, I'm Mark McNeil and welcome to the very first episode of the Hack of All Trades. Today I will be talking about using a portable thermal printer as a replacement for a traditional inkjet or laser printer. For this video, I will be using the Jadens PD-A4 thermal printer. Before I go any further, I just want to point out that this is not a review of this printer specifically, but more so my thoughts on using thermal printers as an alternative for more traditional printers. I bring up this printer because there may be elements I talk about that I assume to be universal when in fact they are printer specific. How do thermal printers work? It's a pretty simple process. Basically, there is a line of heating elements, and the printer can seemingly instantaneously heat whatever elements it needs, which heats the heat-sensitive paper directly beneath it. So I got this printer not for the review, but just because I didn't want to go to FedEx or Staples every time I wanted to print something, especially if I wanted to print out something rather long. I had a few expectations going into this project. It was going to be cheaper because there's no ink involved. I was a little concerned about the limitations of the paper in regards to the kind of paper it can print. I was curious about printing colored elements like photos. I really didn't know what to expect there. Would it have the same hassle as a traditional printer? And what is the environmental impact of this printer? So without further ado, let's investigate. Okay, so let's talk about what you can do and what you can't do. So, printing a multi-page document with rolled paper. My printer marked where the pages end, but I don't like that little extra effort you have to do. It creates a very unclean, sloppy look. Plus, the pages will want to curl. As such, I don't see myself ever intentionally using a roll unless I am printing solely for personal reasons. I would never turn in cut rolled paper into a teacher, into a professor, into anybody that needed something printed out. I just think it looks too sloppy and unprofessional. Also, it's hard to cut when it wants to curl. Now, if there are certain situations you don't want to print in pages, but you almost want a constant feed, it could work. I personally like using it to debug my code as well as review my credit card statement. Granted, there were a few situations where I found a roll to be exceptionally terrible, like my Choose Your Own Adventure of Doom, printing a long document with folded paper. I want to point out that this next topic is paper specific. The paper was perforated, meaning it is meant to be torn, and it did a good job. This fixes one of my issues with the rolled paper. I feel much more reasonable printing with this kind of paper. It's still an extra step to tear it, but it looks clean, and that was my biggest issue. Once again, someone might notice the perforation tear at the top or bottom, but I would feel fine turning this into a teacher or a professor or even a boss. Part of the inspiration for me getting a printer was that I needed to sign a contract for my lease, and I needed to print it out. Now, I don't want to give my landlord something that looks like crap. It makes a bad first impression. This foldable paper, I can work with it. For the record, I purchased this paper from Amazon.com. I'll put a link in the description below. My primary criticism of this paper, while small, is that the paper didn't want to fold the way it went in. It sort of wanted to output like the roll, just as a constant feed. However, after elevating the printer by about a foot, as the paper was ejected and would slowly fall, it wanted to follow the fold it came in, and it ends up in a nice stack looking pretty. So I've tried rolled paper, I've tried folded paper. What about oddly shaped paper? So I tried it out with this blue paper in the shape of the 4 inches by 6 inches, and it came out great. One thing I learned though, with this particular printer, it doesn't check where the paper is in the printer. If I center the page, it has the image in the center. But if I put the page in the left side of the printer, the image will come out on the right side of the printer. But what about sticker paper? Even if you're not replacing a traditional printer, I'm sure many people may consider printing labels for their stickers for their Etsy or eBay shops. Well, check this out. I I wasted the other sticker on a different shot. Okay, so we've tried a few different types of paper for thermal printing. But what if you're in a pinch or just get confused and use regular sticker paper, like an ink or laser printer? After all, isn't it just burning into the paper? Well, on the downside, when I tested it out, nothing happened with classic matte sticker paper. On the upside, my house didn't burn down. Your results may vary. So between the outline and the final draft of the script, I learned something. The thermal printer is not actually burning the page like I initially thought. It's actually a chemical reaction triggered by heat that causes the paper to change color, most of the time in black. This means that you are basically limited to black and white printing. Theoretically, you can print in any color you like. However, it comes with an exceptionally large challenge that we will get into later. Pricing is a little hard to gauge. On Amazon, many toners won't give you an expected page count, and even those that do will generally be something like at 5% page coverage. I have no idea how to determine the page coverage of a typical single-page, single-spaced document. That being said, holding all else equal, from the data I could find, I found that toner typically costs about 9 cents per page, and printer paper costs about 1 cent per page. This gives us a grand total of 10 cents per page. What I found surprising is that thermal paper costs about 1.5 times as much. It costs about 15 cents per page. If you're getting a printer like this to save money, you may save on initial costs, but you lose money overall. You can actually print cheaper pages at a print shop. Plus, you don't need to pay the initial cost of the printer. Because the pricing is worse than average, I'm going to give it a rating of a D in this category. And because pricing was kind of one of the main reasons I bought this printer, I'm actually going to grade it more harshly and give it an F. I tried a few different major retailers to see who would have thermal printer paper in an acceptable format of A4 and US letter, which I later learned are actually different. I tried Office Depot, Walmart, Staples, Target, Michaels, and FedEx. Staples and Office Depot had a limited supply of rolled paper, but it was meant for fax machines, and from the product descriptions, it was unclear if it would be the same form factor. Basically, it was unclear if the circumference of the roll would be too big for my printer. Michaels was interesting because despite selling my thermal printer, my actual thermal printer that I am using to make this review, there were no options for A4 or US thermal paper. Really, they only had sticker paper. FedEx and Target didn't have any results close to this size. Really, the only acceptable option was Walmart.com, but there was no in-store pickup. There wasn't even a ship to this store option. It was only to one's home. That being said, it was still faster than Amazon. I ordered some paper from Amazon and it took 3 weeks to arrive, even with Prime shipping. Being fed up with Amazon, I ordered from Walmart, which only took a couple of days. Environmental impact. The first thing I want to point out is that none of the paper I used was double-sided. While traditional paper is essentially just a rectangle of material, printer paper uses layered materials that, when heat is applied, the layers react with each other. Therefore, you cannot buy regular thermal paper and then print double-sided. Because it uses a chemical process to discolor the paper is coated in chemicals, and because of this, you can't recycle the paper either. According to ChatGPT, when actively printing, it uses about 20% to 33% of the power of an inkjet and about 3% of the power of a laser printer. So its power consumption is significantly less than its competitors, but at the downside of like it doesn't necessarily waste paper, but you cannot optimize the usage of the paper by double siding or recycling the paper. So depending on how you value that It's up to you if it's more environmentally friendly or not. Personally, I give it a D+. Finally, let's talk about its technical convenience. So how much headache did my printer give me? Very little. I believe I had two complaints, and I feel both were printer specific, and I have a hard time imagining that these would exist outside of the brand. It was basically a compatibility issue with my printer and Microsoft Word, which I got fixed. Not 100% sure what went wrong, but I got it fixed. My printer never jammed. It never lost print signal. While troubleshooting was a bit more niche and harder to research, I feel I got it working with significantly less headache than some of the other printers I've used. It never told me I couldn't print a black and white document because I didn't have any magenta ink. I think that alone is pretty cool. One thing I want to bring up, even if it is printer specific, because I loved this, with the exception of the driver, I didn't have to install any software. No Epson Print Manager, no HP Ink Monitor, and after installing and running the setup software, it never popped up again. It didn't make a shortcut on my desktop, it hasn't reminded me about maintenance, it hasn't tried to cross-sell me products, it hasn't installed even more software without my consent. It's been nice, and I kind of forgot there was even any software on there. In terms of headache or lack thereof, I give my printer an A-. One element I was surprised by was how fast it printed, and I really don't think that this is unique to my printer. If you think about it, it makes sense. It's not moving an inkjet nozzle across the page. Its only motor is pushing the paper out, and it doesn't have to wait for any other components. Also, in addition to its print speed, it started printing immediately. My last printer, I'd hit print, then it would take usually a solid minute for my printer to get ready to print, like it was waking up from some sort of deep sleep. This printer, instantaneous. One element that I don't really get conceptually, this is a portable printer. And I don't really get the point of a portable printer. I feel like if you're traveling, most hotels offer office rooms where you can print documents, or if you're staying with friends and family, you can use their printer. Even if you just used it for Etsy and eBay labels, you also need the product with you. So unless you're living out of your car, I don't really understand the appeal of portability. There are certainly some major drawbacks. While you save money on the ink, you actually lose money on the paper. Thermal paper costs about 1.5 times more than standard printer paper. However, printing is much quieter and much faster. Plus, the form factor being so small allows you to store it when you don't need it. That's my favorite part. While rolled paper generally didn't work for me, there were a few exceptions. I actually liked printing my code and my credit card statements on a scroll. For most instances, I could not see myself using rolled paper for anything. However, after switching from rolled paper to perforated folded paper, I found myself thinking, I can work with this. This is acceptable. This change shifted the printer from almost usable to tolerable. There are a few elements I want to figure out better solutions to, like loading paper and paper output, but this can work for me. If I ever get another printer, I don't really know which one I'm going to use if I get an inkjet or another thermal printer. I like being able to print colors and paper types, but I also like being able to put it away in the closet when I'm done with it. I like how quiet and fast it is. You hit print and it just starts. And the lack of headache was just nice. My last printer was so bulky, and it had so many cables to the computer, cables to the outlet, cables to the internet. Cables are just instant mess, and I hate mess. Not to mention, they take up like a cubic foot of space. Overall, final thoughts. Here's my problem. This printer is fine, but I wouldn't call it good. It has enough drawbacks in availability of paper type as well as cost that I don't know if I could recommend this as an alternative to a traditional printer. Maybe in 10 years we'll have more demand for 8.5-inch thermal paper and therefore more supply in terms of availability and type. Maybe we'll have special attachments for feeders and output trays, which might make it a little nicer to work with. It's just, if other printers are good, this is acceptable. And that's a downgrade for what could be a comparable cost, all things considered. If you have a niche reason to buy it and maybe it would work for you, maybe the speed, quietness, and small form factor is exactly what you need. But as of now, I think I would lean to just getting a regular printer. Do you have a thermal printer? What are your thoughts on it? Leave a comment down below. I'm Mark McNeil. This has been the Hack of All Trades. Have a great day.